Hello and welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we look at how cells are adapted to carry out specific functions. We also look at what tissues, organs, and organ systems are. Now, you will recall that the cell is the structural and functional unit of an organism. Now, what do you mean by these two phrases, structural unit and functional unit? Now, structural unit refers to the fact that the cell makes up the body of living organisms. In some organisms, the body consists of just one cell. Such organisms are said to be unicellular. And then there are those whose body is made up of many cells. These organisms are said to be multicellular. So whether the body consists of just one cell, that is a unicellular, or the body is made up of many cells, that's multicellular, the cell makes up the structural unit of any living organism. Functional unit refers to the fact that it is the cell that carries out all the life processes in an organism. These life processes include respiration, excretion, growth and development, reproduction, sensitivity. All these occur at the functional unit of the cell. It is the cell that carries out respiration, excretion, and all those processes that are associated with the living organisms. And therefore, what makes an organism living are the processes that go on within the cell, are the functions that the cell carries out. And that's why it is true, very correct biologically, to say that the cell is the structural and the functional unit of organisms. Now, some organisms, like the unicellular ones, for example, amoeba. In amoeba, the cell, which comprises the entire organism body, is specialized to carry out all these life processes, that is respiration, excretion, growth and development, gases exchange, and all those characteristics of living organisms are carried out by a single cell. Okay, but in the multicellular organisms, different cells are specialized to carry out different functions. So there will be those cells that are specialized to carry out excretion. There will be those that are specialized to provide nutrients for the rest of the body. There will be those that are specialized for transmission of communication, those that are specialized for protection, and so on. So in multicellular organisms, each cell is adapted to perform a specific function. Now this brings us to this concept of cell specialization. Cell specialization, you can describe it as a process whereby cells are structurally modified to perform specific functions. They are structurally modified to perform specific function. So you can see here we're relating the two concepts. One, there is structure, and we relate the structure to function. It's a very important concept in biology. So in cell specialization, cells are structurally modified to be able to perform specific function. We look at examples of specialized cells and see how their structures enable them to perform specific function. And just before we continue, cell specialization, it's important to know that is also referred to as differentiation. Cell specialization also means differentiation. That is, when the cells are produced through cell division, they all look the same, but as they become structurally modified, they differentiate not only in structure but also the functions that they're able to carry out. So we start by looking at specialized cells in animal bodies. Now the first one, the sperm cell. The sperm cell is one of the most specialized cells in the body of animals. There is a head, a middle part, and then a tail. The function of the sperm cell is to fertilize the ovum. Now if you look at the structure, of this cell, you can see the structural modifications that enable it to fertilize the ovum. These modifications include the body being streamlined. The streamlined body of the cell enables it to swim fast and easily. It can move easily through water. The presence of a tail that propels it during swimming, as the tail lashes from side to side, it enables this cell to move or to swim in a specific direction towards the ovum to effect fertilization. Then the middle part of the cell has many mitochondria. These numerous mitochondria carry out the process of respiration to release energy that is then used for swimming. So sperm cells are very energetic because their movement requires a lot of energy. They're able to swim towards the ovum where they fuse with it to bring about fertilization. So the sperm cell is highly specialized to move, to swim through fluids and get to where the ovum is for fertilization. Another cell, highly adaptable cell in animals, is the red blood cell. The red blood cell, again, is also one of the highly specialized. Look at the structure, because the function is to transport oxygen from the lungs to the tissues. And the structure is modified to facilitate that function. The red blood cell, unlike most of the other animal cells, is rather flattened, with the central part being sunken. This greatly increases the surface area across which gases will diffuse into and out of the cell. So the function of the red blood cell is to transport, and for it to be able to transport the oxygen, it must readily absorb and also be able to readily release the oxygen to the surrounding at a very fast rate. So some of the structural modifications of the red blood cell include the shape. It is disc shape. This is to enable it pass through the very narrow blood capillaries, because the blood capillaries are so narrow and they ramify or pass through the tissues, bringing blood to as close as possible to the cells. So this is a blood capillary. The red blood cells are disc shaped. So it's a capillary. The red blood cells are disc shaped so that they can fit within the narrow capillaries and flow through in a single file. The advantage of flowing through in a single file is to expose the surfaces of the cells to the surroundings so that gases can diffuse in and out. So when the cells move in a single file through the capillary, the red blood cells are individually exposed. So their surfaces are exposed to facilitate diffusion. And in this way, the red blood cells are able to take up oxygen and also release oxygen to the tissues. So they pick up the oxygen in the lungs and release the oxygen in the tissues. Both in the lungs and in the body tissues, there are capillaries, and through these capillaries, the red blood cells are able to move in a single file because of their disc shape. The second structural adaptation that is externally visible is the sunken center. The sunken center greatly increases the surface area, because when the center is sunken, the sunken center gives the cell the biconcave shape. This is a biconcave shape because this surface here is sunken, is like a cave. There is another cave on this side. So that's why it's said to be biconcave. And this greatly increases the surface area across which gases will be absorbed. Oxygen will diffuse. This oxygen will diffuse into the cell across the very large exposed surface, and this is facilitated by the sunken center. So red blood cells are able to carry out their function, that is of transporting oxygen from the lungs to the tissues, because of these structural modifications that they have undergone. The third animal cell that you're going to consider that is highly specialized to carry out its function is the nerve cell. The nerve cell makes up the nervous system. Function of this nerve cell is to transmit. It transmits impulses from one part of the body to another. So the impulse will be conducted from one end of the nerve cell to the other. Now, for that to be possible, this nerve cell must have particular adaptations, structural features that will enhance this conduction of a nerve impulse. Nerve impulse is a form of electrical message, flow of ions. It's a kind of an electrical message through which communication occurs within the body. So from one part of the body to the other, messages can be sent in the form of nerve impulse, and the nerve cells are specialized to conduct these nerve impulse. The modifications of the nerve cells include, obviously, for it to be able to conduct the nerve impulse from one part of the body to the other, it must be long. So the nerve cell is actually the longest cell in the body, and that is mainly due to the elongated part known as the axon. Axon can be quite long, and it is this axon that enables the transmission of nerve impulse from one part of the body to the other. For example, from the spinal cord within the backbone to the remotest cell in the toes of the legs. That conduction of the nerve impulse will be carried out by the axon. So the first modification is the elongated axon. That is the part of the nerve cell which conducts the impulse from one part of the body to the other. Secondly, the nerve cell has a cell body. This is a cell body with a very wide surface area. There's a very large surface area exposed for contact with adjoining nerve cells. So this large surface area of the cell body enables this nerve cell to make contact with thousands of other cells around it. Now that is important because it creates a very wide network for effective communication. So the cell body with its large surface area enables a single nerve cell to network, to make contact with so many other nerve cells, and this makes the communication very, very effective. The third structural feature is the presence of the many slender structures known as the dendrites at both ends. At both ends there are these slender structures. We have the dendrites. So through the dendrites are able to receive the nerve impulse from another nerve cell. Then through the axon, the nerve impulse is transmitted to another part of the body, and upon reaching the terminal end, the dendrites will transmit the impulse to the next cell, maybe another nerve cell or just another body cell. So the dendrites are these slender structures at both terminals for receiving and for dispatching the nerve impulse. So the more the dendrites, the greater the ability of a nerve cell to receive impulse and also to dispatch and distribute it to other nerve cells in the body. Now, those are the specialized animal cells. There are many other specialized animal cells, but to just look at those three to illustrate the process of cell specialization or differentiation. We can also look at a few examples of specialized plant cells. The specialized plant cells include, first one, root hair cell, which is found in the roots of plants. The root hair cell is adapted to carry out the specific function of water and mineral salts absorption from the soil. Root hair cell functions to absorb water and mineral salts from the soil. It has the following modifications. One, there is an elongated projection, that is the root hair. So you should not confuse the root hair and the root hair cell. The root hair cell is the entire cell. And then within the root hair cell, there is the root hair, which is simply an elongated part. This elongated part of the cell, that is the root hair, increases the surface area for absorption of water and minerals. So all this is an additional surface across which water and minerals, salts, for example, potassium ions, are absorbed into the cell. So the root hair increases the surface area for absorption of water and mineral salts. And also secondly, there is the large subvacuole. This large subvacuole has a high concentration of salts. There are a high concentration of salts within the subvacuole. This high concentration of salts increases osmotic pressure of the cell, which in turn facilitates absorption of water by osmosis, because water moves down a concentration gradient from where it is highly concentrated to where it is lowly concentrated. So the presence of the salts in the subvacuole makes the concentration of water in the cell to be low, relative to the surrounding soil solution. So because of this difference in concentration, there is a gradient that is created, and this is what facilitates absorption of water into the root hair cells by osmosis. That is the presence of salts within the subvacuole. So the root hair cell is specifically adapted to enhance absorption of water and mineral salts from the soil solution. The second specialized plant cell is the Palisade cell. Palisade cells are found mainly in the leaves. Their function is to carry out photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is a process by which plants synthesize their own food using light energy, carbon dioxide, and water. Now, how are the Palisade cells able to carry out photosynthesis effectively? It's because of the following modifications. One, they have numerous chloroplasts that carry out photosynthesis. These chloroplasts are specialized organelles, as you've seen earlier. They are specialized organelles that carry out the process of photosynthesis. So for the Palisade cells to be effective in carrying out photosynthesis, each cell must have as many chloroplasts as possible. So the Palisade cells are characterized by a large concentration. It's the large concentration of chloroplast within the cells. Secondly, other than the chloroplast, the Palisade cells have a large subvacuole. This subvacuole stores many water that is used in photosynthesis. So water will move from the subvacuole to the chloroplast in the cytoplasm, where it is used for photosynthesis. Of course, also some of the products of photosynthesis, like sugars, will be released and be stored within the subvacuole in solution form, because remember, one of the functions of the subvacuole is storage of salts and sugars. So some of the sugars produced during photosynthesis is transported into the subvacuole where it is stored. But the main function of the subvacuole is to provide water, a source of water which is used in photosynthesis. Now, the third specialized plant cell is the Parenchyma cell. Parenchyma cell. Parenchyma cell is found in both the stem and the roots of plants. Its function is mainly storage, and also as a result of its ability to store material, it's able to provide support to the plant. Structural features of the Parenchyma cell adapts it to perform these two functions. And one of the modifications is that it has a very large subvacuole. This large subvacuole functions as the storage center for water and soluble food substances. The thin cell wall allows for the rapid intake of water into the cell. So water moves by osmosis very rapidly across the thin cell wall into the subvacuole. So as the subvacuole enlarges after taking in a lot of water, it makes the cells become turgid. And when these cells become turgid, they are able to provide, thus they're able to provide support to the stem and to the root. So this second function of providing support only occurs after the plant cells have taken in water by osmosis. The sub-vacuole then exerts an outward pressure that makes the cells turgid. So when these cells become turgid, they're able to provide support to the plant. So these are some of the specialized cells in both plants and animals. And as you've seen, each one of them has structural features that enable it to perform those specific functions. Now, we can now turn to tissues. What are tissues? A tissue is simply defined as a group of cells that perform one specific function. A group of cells that perform one specific function. Now, obviously, for them to be able to perform one specific function, they must all have the same structural modifications. So usually, tissue consists of cells that have similar or the same structural modification, or they have the same structural features that enable them to perform their function. Again, look at examples of tissues, starting with animal tissues. One of them is the muscle tissue. There are different types of muscles. You have skeletal muscles, smooth muscles, and cardiac muscles. We look at the cardiac muscles. Cardiac muscles are found in the heart, and they consist of muscle cells that are joint. And these muscle cells, like all other cells, have nucleus, but then within the cell there are fibers, filaments that are contractile. And this way, these cells are able to contract and relax to effect movement. So the function of the cardiac muscle is that it contracts to pump blood from the heart to the rest of the body. Secondly, we have epithelial tissue. In animal bodies, an epithelial tissue consists of one or more layers of cells that form the external covering of the body organs. So some parts of the body or some parts of the body organs will have more than one layer of epithelial cells, but majority will just have one layer. Like this is one layer. This is one layer of epithelial cells. So the function is to form the external covering of body organs, and in this way they're able to provide protection of the underlying tissues from mechanical damage, from mechanical injury, and in some cases even from infection. Now, some epithelial tissues are specialized even more in that they contain cilia. So they are known as ciliated cells, and these ciliated cells therefore form the ciliated epithelium. The ciliated epithelium is found in various parts of the body, the mammalian body, including the trachea, and also in the female mammal. They're also found in the fallopian tube, also known as the oviduct. The function of this ciliated epithelium is to propel mucus along the surface. So if it is in the trachea, the beating of the cilia propels the mucus that may be carrying pathogens that have been trapped This mucus is pushed towards the pharynx, where it can be removed from the body, or it can be swallowed, and then the contents of the mucus be digested in the stomach. So even in the fallopian tube, the ciliated epithelium helps in the movement of the mucus, which then carries the ovum along towards the uterus. Plant tissues also include, just like in animals, we have the outermost covering, but these ones are known as the epidermal tissue, not epithelial. In plants, we talk about epidermal tissue. It is a single thin layer of cells that covers the outer parts of the leaves, the stems, and the roots. So they're usually one layer. The epidermal tissue is usually one layer in the leaves, in the stem, and in the roots. The function is to protect the inner tissues from mechanical damage. But in terrestrial plants, the leaves and the stem are covered by a waterproof cuticle. This waterproof cuticle is secreted by the epidermal cells on the outer surface. So these will be found on the outer surface, where the waterproof cuticle minimizes water loss, because remember, the leaves and the stems are exposed to the dry atmosphere, so the plant runs the risk of getting dehydrated. So one of the most important adaptive features of the epidermal tissues in terrestrial plants, these are plants that are found on dry land, is the ability to secrete the waxy cuticle, which minimizes water loss from the plant. Then there is the Palisade tissue, which is a group of cells that has numerous chloroplasts. The chloroplasts are organelles that carry the green pigment chlorophyll. So a collection of Palisade cells makes up the Palisade tissue. And the function of the Palisade tissue is manufacture of food by photosynthesis. And because of the presence, that is because due to the presence of the numerous chloroplasts in the individual cells.